Numbers are thrown out all the time.
Are they proof of some truth or just fluff that bluffs us? These statistics need some serious looking into. I'm Brendan Fernandez, and that's what I'll do. Because some numbers are just worth figuring out. On this episode of It Figures, we pop the question. In 2012, wedding bells chimed loudly in Singapore. More than 27,000 people got married, the highest number in 30 years.
Cause to rejoice? Or do these numbers tell only half the story? And if you think that love is priceless, think again.
Last year, 27,936 couples said, I do. That's 20% more marriages than 32 years ago. In fact, 2012 was the loudest our wedding bells have rung in the last 50 years. A reason to celebrate?
Well, not quite. That's just the total number of marriages. While that has been on an upward trend, has the number of marriages been increasing in proportion with our population growth? Is Singapore truly feeling the love?
To answer that, we need to look at the crude marriage rate. It measures the number of marriages registered in a year per 1,000 residents, married and unmarried.
On the horizontal, the last 30 years. On the vertical, the crude marriage rate. 1981, that was the year the marriage rate spiked at 10.6. That was the highest rate recorded in 32 years. Since then, the crude marriage rate has been on a downward trend.
In 1986, the marriage rate fell to 7.7. Another trough was in 1998, during the Asian financial crisis. Marriage rate fell to 7.1. Both 1986 and 1998 were the years of the tiger. In Chinese tradition, the tiger year is seen as inauspicious for marriage.
The lowest point in the last 30 years was in 2010. Marriage rate fell to an all-time low of 6.1.
There were only 6.1 marriages registered per 1,000 residents that year.
2010 wasn't just any year of the tiger. It was the year of the widowing tiger. In Chinese tradition, a woman who marries in that year will bring premature death to her husband. Superstition aside, 2010 was just 1 year after the worst global financial crisis since the Great Depression.
In 2009, Singapore's GDP growth was negative 1%. How did this affect the all-time low marriage rate of 2010?
People are normally planning their wedding some time ahead, and if the economy gets worse, often they might postpone the wedding for some time, not only because it's harder for them to put aside the money, but also because they may be a little uncertain about the future of their job, you know, that they might be thrown out of work or something like that, and that could interfere with their family building plans.
Singapore wasn't the only country experiencing a marriage slump in 2010. Marriages in Europe hit an all-time low of 4.4 marriages per 1,000 inhabitants. In the US, it stood at 6.8. For the first time in American history, unmarried women outnumbered married ones.
Back to our graph. In 2011, crude marriage rate bounced back to 6.7. And while the number of marriages in 2012 was at a record high, in terms of crude marriage rate, it was only 6.7.
So while the total number of marriages went up by 20% from 1980, the crude marriage rate actually went down by about 30% in the same period.
Well, this is just to do with the increase in the population over time. So, you know, even though the number of marriages has gone up a bit, in relation to the faster growth in the population, it means that the rate has been going down. The statistics show that there's a higher proportion married among the permanent residents, quite a bit higher than among the citizens. I don't know whether that has to do with the criteria for, you know, choosing people to be granted permanent residence, but certainly that's what the statistics show.
Now, what if we looked at the general marriage rate instead? Unlike the crude marriage rate, the general marriage rate looks at the number of marriages per 1,000 unmarried people between the ages of 15 and 44. It's also broken down according to gender.
The blue line is the general marriage rate for male Singapore residents.
In the last 32 years, it has fallen some 19%.
Now, here's the marriage rate for female residents. Interesting to note, the marriage rate has fallen even further for women in Singapore.
Out of every 1,000 unmarried residents, 68.9 women got married in 1980. In 2012, out of every 1,000 unmarried residents, only 41.6 women got married. That's a drop of almost 40% in 32 years.
Some of my colleagues talk about what they call the marriage package on the woman, for example, that she will be available to care for the parents-in-law as they get old. That is her husband's parents. And also, of course, she's expected in this modern age to get into a career, so she's expected to be in a career, she's expected to raise children, she's expected to do most of the housework, she's expected to be available to care for elderly parents, not only her own, but her husband's. It doesn't look all that appealing. So all of these things are affecting, I think, the trends towards quite a high proportion, you know, getting up to 15% or so of women and of men who are never marrying.
But while the proportion of singles in Singapore continues to rise, it seems that the yearning to tie the knot one day remains strong. So what's to blame for our marital woes?
Let's look at the median age of first marriages. What does that mean? If we lined everyone up according to the age at which they first got married, the median age would be the halfway mark.
In 1980, men got married at a median age of 26, women at 23. 32 years later, in 2012, men got married at a median age of 30. That's 4 years later. So let's say you were a Singaporean man who finished national service and then went on to university. You would have waited another 6 years after that before taking the plunge. The women are waiting even longer. They now get married at a median age of 28. So let's say a Singaporean woman finished university at age 21. She waited another 7 years before saying, "I do." Compare that with the median age for marriage in the US. In 2012, it was 26 for women and 28 for men.
I think we have to look at, you know, the trends in marriage long term, and there's no question, if you look at it long term in Singapore, marriage has gone down. I mean, at any given age, the proportion marrying has gone down, and the age at marriage has gone up, and the proportion who are not marrying at all has gone up.
The proportion of singles among Singaporean residents rose from 30% in 2001 to 32% in 2011.
Doesn't sound like much, until we find out that the increase in proportion of singles came mostly from the younger group.
Between 25 to 29. In 2001, only 65% of men in that age range were single, and 41% of women in their late 20s were single. 10 years later, in 2011, 76% of men in that age range were single, and more than half the women, 56% in their late 20s, were single. That's an increase of 15 percentage points. How about the slightly older set, 30 to 34, the years when people usually settle down? In 2001, only 30.6% of men and 19.3% of women in that age bracket were single. 10 years later on, in 2011, 37% of men were single, and 1 in 4 women between 30 and 34 were single. Singapore's National Population and Talent Division, or NPTD, conducted a survey in 2012 to help policy planners boost the nation's marriage and fertility rates. The survey found that a large number of singles, 83% to be precise, want to get married. So what's stopping them? Reason number 1, not finding Mr. or Miss Right.
In every fairy tale love story, there is always the one true love. Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty all had their own Prince Charming, and Beauty had the Beast.
When it comes to looking for a potential spouse, what exactly are Singaporeans looking for? Violet Lim runs a dating agency that helps singles find love in Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. Since 2009, she has conducted a yearly survey to find out what Asians valued when looking for their other halves. In 2012, she spoke to 1,900 singles. 80% were 26 to 40 years old. 66% had at least a degree. The top priority for men in all 3 countries was a pretty face. Looks didn't factor at all for the women. Instead, women from all 3 countries ranked confidence as their top priority in their search for a mate.
A lot of people would think that, oh, I think ladies, they're looking for someone who's very career-minded, someone who's doing well in their career. So that was actually one of the options. But at the end, that wasn't the first thing that they looked out for. They're looking for someone who is confident and someone who carry themselves well. And I think because confidence, in a way, it will lead to how successful that person would be now, or maybe even in the future.
For those who have found Mr. or Miss Right, what is stopping them from taking the plunge? Thanks. According to the same survey, money was the biggest hurdle. So how much do couples in Singapore need in their bank accounts before getting married?
Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars.
No money, no honey. Corny, but in Singapore, it isn't too far from the truth. A government survey tells us that singles in serious relationships say that money, or rather the lack of it, is preventing them from taking the plunge. So how much do couples in Singapore need in their bank accounts before getting married?
I think about 20,000 is reasonable.
20 to 30K for a reasonable and a happy marriage.
I think for a typical Chinese wedding, I'll need probably about $50,000.
It comes up to maybe like $60,000, $70,000.
If you believe that love is priceless, then you clearly have not met Dr. Houston Kwa. Dr. Kwa believes you can put a number to everything, including love and marriage.
There are many reasons why people get married. One is, of course, to produce legitimate children. Second reason is, of course, a pooling of incomes compared to if you have been single. I've defined income not just in terms of money income, but in terms of total income comprising of both market income and also the non-market income, which is like home goods, the cooking, washing, cleaning, childcare. These are all home goods. It's more efficient if you have marriages. Third reason I think that people get married is what we call lower the transaction cost. For example, if I'm in love with somebody, dating somebody, there's always the time cost that one spends on calling each other, spending time together with each other, right? Traveling distance to meet each other. But if you are married, you save all this time and money, and you're in the same home and you see each other very often at home. There's another argument is what we call economies of scale, right? If you are single, then you will have to do a lot of things by yourself, you will have to buy your own fridge, oven, and so on. But if you are married, then you only need one fridge instead of 2 fridges or 2 TV sets, and so on and so forth, right?
The price of 2 is better than 1, especially if you marry the right one. When you marry someone who is very much like you, in terms of interests, tastes, and lifestyles, that's called positive assortive mating. That's apparently more economically viable than negative assortive mating. That's when you marry someone who is poles apart from you. So while opposites can attract, the marriage might not be as cost-effective.
Positive assortive mating, it's likely to lower the cost of a marriage because you are doing things that you like to do together. So watching a movie, going to operas, or having some sporting activities if you're adventurous outdoor person. But if you have negative assortment, then you're going to have a problem because one of the spouse would have to compromise. And compromise comes in the form of opportunity cost of both time and money. Take for example, I mentioned about an opera, right? If one spouse hates an opera, so every time the other spouse, in order to accommodate the happiness of the other spouse by so-called compromising, which in economics we call trade-offs, he or she then goes to the opera, and which he spends time there, time which could be used for other things, but I instead spend on the opera, and he or she suffers disutility or unhappiness during that time. And all this, of course, leads to not just fall in happiness, but also maybe productive losses for society.
Now, marriage isn't just an economically viable proposition. Apparently, it's also good for your health. A 20-year study done in the US suggests that married people tend to live longer than singles. Why? Apparently, being married tends to encourage good health behaviors.
So is marriage a boon to health in Singapore as it is in the United States? In Singapore last year, the Immigration and Checkpoints Authority, or ICA, grouped deaths according to age and marital status. 2 in 10 of the singles who died were in the ages of 50 to 59. Whereas for those who were married, 3 in 10 celebrated their 80th birthday before passing on.
The association between marriage, health, and wealth notwithstanding, what's interesting is that more couples in Singapore seem to be ending their marriages.
On the horizontal, the last 30 years. On the vertical, the crude divorce rate. That's the number of divorces and annulments granted per 1,000 residents.
Here's how it looks. It's been on an upward trend.
In 2012, crude divorce rate stands at 1.9. 32 years ago, it was 0.8. Divorce rates have more than doubled in the last 30 years.
If we take a closer look at the numbers, in 1980, there was 1 divorce or annulment for every 13 marriages. 32 years later, in 2012, for every 3.8 marriages, there was 1 couple going through a marital dissolution. This includes both divorces and annulments.
Marriages involving those aged between 20 and 24 are the ones most likely to fail. In the last 30 years, that is the demographic with the highest divorce rates. Last year, for every 1,000 men in the 20 to 24 age group, slightly more than 28 ended their marriages. For women, the figure was just over 29. And at which stage of their marriage do Singaporean couples call it quits? The 7-year itch appears to be just a myth. For the last 20 years, the median duration of marriages has consistently been 10 years.
Divorce has always been frowned on in society here, so people don't get divorced without thinking rather hard about it, because it's going to affect their relationship with their family, it's going to affect their standing in the community and things like that. And also even the legal requirements before you get married mean that it's not easy to divorce very quickly after marriage in Singapore. So all of those things are going to affect the length of time before people get divorced.
With the number of divorces rising steadily, there's a sizable number of divorcees willing to give marriage another go.
This is the total number of marriages in Singapore. This includes both first marriages and remarriages. 30 years ago, remarriages used to make up only 6.8% of all marriages. 30 years later, in 2012, this is the proportion of remarriages. 1 in 4 marriages involved a couple with at least one partner remarrying.
So, 2012's record high number of marriages was made up of a significant number of remarriages.
Marriage rates have been falling, and correspondingly, fertility rates. Coming up with the right formula to revive marriage and fertility rates is something the Singapore government has been grappling with for years. And while several government initiatives have been implemented, the numbers still don't add up. Just what will it take to bring back that loving feeling?